blood always looks black under the dim lights of high-end restaurants. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of power and unity. Instead, a hastily scribbled warning on a napkin passed by a trembling waitress with sharp eyes would burn an empire to the ground and start a deadly war. Jazz floated through the ambient, gold-leaf dining room of Laura, Chicago's most exclusive French-Italian fusion restaurant. The air smelled of white truffles, expensive perfume, and old money. For Ilara Jenkins, a 26-year-old waitress pulling her 6th double shift of the week, it just smelled like exhaustion. Ilara stood by the server station, discreetly adjusting the collar of her stiff, black uniform. She had learned long ago how to become invisible in rooms like this. The wealthy patrons who dined at Laura didn't want to see the staff. They only wanted their crystal water glasses magically refilled and their imported Wagyu beef served without interruption. Tonight, however, her section included Table 7. And Table 7 was commanding the nervous attention of every staff member in the building. Sitting at the center of the plush, velvet-backed booth was Silas Gallo. Even without the whispered rumors in the kitchen, Ilara would have known Silas was dangerous. He possessed the kind of quiet, absolute stillness that only belonged to apex predators. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit that likely cost more than Ilara's annual rent, Silas was the newly crowned head of the Gallo Syndicate. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his jawline looked sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that unsettled Ilara, cold, calculating, and an unyielding shade of slate grey. Opposite him sat Victoria Kensington. She was the heiress to a rival, highly lucrative political family with deep ties to the city's corrupt underbelly. Tonight was their engagement dinner. It was supposed to be a merger of two unassailable dynasties. Victoria looked immaculate in a backless emerald silk gown, a massive, brilliant cut diamond resting heavy on her left hand. But Ilara, who had grown up in the rougher neighborhoods of the South Side, had a survival instinct honed by tragedy. Her older brother, Tommy, had run with a low-level crew before a bad deal took his life. Tommy had taught her how to read a room, how to spot the wolves hiding among the sheep, and right now, all of Ilara's alarms were screaming. She picked up a silver pitcher of ice water and made her way toward Table 7, her footsteps silent against the thick Persian rugs. As she approached, she kept her eyes downcast, but her peripheral vision was hard at work. Something was entirely wrong with the room's rhythm. Silas's usual security detail, two towering, familiar men who usually stood near the kitchen doors, were nowhere to be seen. In their place were three men Ilara had never served before. They were seated at different tables near the front entrance, the side exit, and the coat check. They weren't eating. They wore suits that fit a little too snugly across the chest. And they shared the same dead-eyed, hyper-vigilant stare. They weren't watching the room to protect Silas. They were watching Silas. Ilara stepped up to the table. "More water, Miss Kensington?" Victoria jumped slightly, her manicured hand slipping beneath the white linen tablecloth. "Yes. Fine. Thank you." As Ilara poured the water, she noticed a faint sheen of sweat on Victoria's porcelain forehead. The heiress was breathing shallowly. Ilara's gaze flicked down to the gap between the tablecloth and Victoria's lap. The blue glow of a burner phone illuminated the silk of her dress. Victoria's thumb was hovering over the screen, typing frantically. "The scallops are exquisite tonight," Silas said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that somehow cut through the jazz music. He didn't look at Victoria's hands. He was casually sipping his Barolo wine. "You seem distracted, Victoria." "Just thinking about the guest list, darling." Victoria lied smoothly, flashing a dazzling, artificial smile. She checked her diamond-encrusted Cartier watch for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Ilara moved to refill Silas's glass. As she leaned in, a well-dressed man, ostensibly a busboy, though Ilara knew every busboy on shift and didn't recognize him, brushed past the table to clear a bread plate. As he did, Ilara heard a barely audible whisper pass between him and Victoria. 4 minutes. Stay clear of the crossfire." The silver pitcher suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Ilara's blood ran cold. She backed away from the table, bowing her head slightly, and retreated to the safety of the server station. Her mind raced. She was just a waitress. It wasn't her business. In the world of the gallows and the Kensingtons, civilians who interfered ended up at the bottom of the Chicago River. If Victoria was orchestrating a hit on her own fiancé, she had the entire restaurant locked down. The exits were covered. Silas's men had been neutralized or bought off. In less than 4 minutes, Table 7 was going to be sprayed with bullets. And Ilara, whose section was directly behind them, was standing right in the kill zone. She looked across the room at Silas. He was calmly slicing a piece of steak, completely unaware that his beautiful fiancée had just sold his life to his enemies. Ilara thought of her brother, Tommy. She thought about the night he died, bleeding out in an alley because no one had bothered to warn him he was walking into a trap. Silas Gallo was a criminal, a ruthless mob boss, but something inside Ilara rebelled against the sheer treachery of what was about to happen. If she ran now, the men at the doors would notice. She couldn't leave, but she couldn't just stand there and watch a slaughter. Her hands trembling, Ilara grabbed her leather-bound order pad and a heavy brass pen. Ilara ducked behind the towering espresso machine at the service station, out of the direct line of sight of the men by the doors. Her breath hitched in her throat as she pressed the pen to the green-lined paper. She didn't have time for poetry or pleasantries. Your fiancé set a trap. They are not your men. Exits blocked. Leave now. She tore the small rectangular slip from the pad, folding it over and over until it was no larger than a postage stamp. Her palms were sweating so heavily she was terrified the ink would run. 3 minutes. She needed an excuse to approach the table again, something that wouldn't raise suspicion. She grabbed the dessert menus, tucked the tiny folded square between her thumb and index finger, and picked up a heavy silver dessert spoon. Walking back out onto the dining floor felt like wading through deep water. Every step was agonizing. The jazz music seemed to distort, stretching into a low, mocking hum. The man by the coat check shifted his weight, his hand resting casually inside his suit jacket. Ilara reached table 7. Victoria was clutching her wine glass so tightly her knuckles were white. Silas was leaning back against the velvet booth, his eyes half closed, listening to the music. Would you care to see the dessert menus? Ilara asked, her voice remarkably steady, despite the hurricane of panic in her chest. No, Victoria snapped instantly. We'll just take the check. Actually, Silas interjected smoothly, opening his eyes. I think I'd like a coffee. Bring the menus. Of course, sir. Ilara moved to hand the menu to Silas. As she did, she intentionally bumped the edge of the table, letting the silver dessert spoon clatter loudly against the polished marble floor. It bounced, landing directly beside Silas's hand-stitched leather Oxfords. Apologies, sir, Ilara gasped, dropping to a crouch beneath the eyeline of the table. As she reached for the spoon, her hand brushed against Silas's ankle. He shifted, his hand instinctively dropping below the table to investigate. Ilara didn't hesitate. She pressed the tiny, folded square of paper firmly into the palm of his hand. Silas's fingers twitched, instantly closing around the foreign object. He didn't pull away. He didn't gasp. He was a man who lived his entire life waiting for the knife in the dark. Ilara stood back up, her face flushed red. I'll get you a fresh spoon right away, sir. She turned and walked away, not daring to look back. She needed to get to the kitchen. Once through the swinging double doors, there was a service hallway that led to the alley. It was her only chance to survive the incoming bloodbath. Back at the table, Silas casually brought his hand to his lap. Under the concealment of the heavy tablecloth, he unrolled the paper using his thumb. He kept his face entirely neutral, a mask of aristocratic boredom, as he glanced down for a fraction of a second. Your fiancé set a trap. They are not your men. Exits blocked. Leave now. Silas's heart flatlined for a single beat, then surged with adrenaline. He didn't look at the doors. He didn't look at the men. He looked at Victoria. Something wrong, Silas? Victoria asked, her voice trembling just a fraction. Just a slight headache, Silas lied. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying speed. His trusted lieutenant had insisted on handling the perimeter security tonight. His lieutenant had been bought. Victoria's nervous energy, the sudden disappearance of his personal guards, the busboy brushing past. He had seconds. Silas knew that standing up and running would trigger the ambush immediately. He needed chaos. He needed to blind them. Silas reached for his half-full glass of Barolo wine. In one sudden, violently explosive motion, he shattered the glass directly against the heavy brass base of the table lamp. The glass exploded. Sparks showered across the tablecloth as the lamp short-circuited. Victoria screamed, throwing her hands up to protect her face. The sound was the trigger the hitters had been waiting for. But it had come 30 seconds too early. The man by the coat check drew a suppressed Mac, 1-0 from his coat and fired. The thwip-thwip-thwip of silenced bullets tore through the air, shattering the enormous crystal chandelier hanging above the center of the room. Glass rained down like deadly hail. Patrons began to scream, diving beneath tables as the elegant dining room devolved into a war zone. Silas hadn't waited to see the chandelier fall. The second he smashed the lamp, he dropped entirely beneath the table, drawing the compact Glock 19 he never left home without. He kicked the heavy mahogany table upward with both legs, flipping it directly onto Victoria and acting as a barricade against the incoming fire from the front entrance. He scuttled on his hands and knees, moving with terrifying, practiced speed toward the server station. Ilara had just reached the swinging kitchen doors when the first bullets hit the drywall beside her head, showering her in white plaster dust. She screamed, dropping to the floor, covering her head as a waiter nearby fell, clutching his shoulder. Suddenly, a hand gripped her bicep like a steel vice. Ilara looked up, terrified, expecting to see one of the hitters. Instead, it was Silas Gallo. His grey eyes were wide, alive with lethal electricity, but perfectly focused. "You saved my life," Silas growled over the deafening screams and gunfire. "Now, show me how to save yours. Where is the back exit?" Through the prep kitchen," Ilara stammered, paralyzed by fear. "Get up," Silas commanded, pulling her to her feet. He shoved her through the swinging doors just as a bullet tore through the round window of the door, missing Silas's neck by inches. They burst into the kitchen. It was absolute pandemonium. Chefs in white coats were scrambling, pots of boiling water were spilling across the industrial tile, and a thick haze of smoke was rising from an unattended grill. "Move! Keep your head down!" Silas yelled, pushing Ilara ahead of him. He kept his gun raised, scanning the rear entrance. Two men in black suits burst through the service hallway doors at the far end of the kitchen. Victoria's men had the back covered, too. Silas didn't hesitate. He raised his Glock and fired twice. The loud, unsuppressed cracks echoed off the stainless steel counters. The lead man dropped, clutching his chest. The second man dove behind a massive walk-in freezer door, returning fire. Bullets pinged off the metal countertops, tearing into hanging pots and pans with ear-splitting clangs. Ilara fell to her knees, sliding on a puddle of spilled olive oil, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the burning impact of a bullet. "Stay down," Silas ordered. He grabbed a massive, heavy iron skillet from a nearby stove and hurled it directly at the freezer door, buying himself a half-second distraction. As the remaining hitter flinched, Silas leaned out from behind a prep counter and fired a single, precise shot. The kitchen went deathly quiet, save for the hiss of the grill and the distant screams from the dining room. Silas grabbed Ilara's arm again, hauling her off the slick floor. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her uniform for blood. "No," Ilara gasped, shaking uncontrollably. "No, I'm okay." "Then run." They sprinted down the narrow service hallway, leaping over the downed men, and smashed into the heavy metal fire exit door. They spilled out into the cold, unforgiving Chicago night. The alleyway was dark, smelling of rain and garbage. Police sirens were already wailing in the distance, a rising chorus of flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet asphalt. Silas pushed Ilara against the cold brick wall of the alley, his chest heaving as he scanned the rooftops and fire escapes for snipers. The night was clear. They had broken the perimeter. He slowly lowered his weapon, finally looking down at the trembling waitress huddled against the bricks. Her black uniform was covered in plaster dust and oil. Her dark hair had fallen out of its neat bun. "Silas Gallo, a man who trusted absolutely no one, had just been betrayed by the woman he was supposed to marry, and his life had been saved by a complete stranger making minimum wage. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tiny, folded square of paper, stained with grease and sweat. He looked from the paper to Ilara. "What's your name?" Silas asked. His voice suddenly calm, a stark contrast to the violence they had just escaped. "Ilara," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself against the biting wind. "Ilara Jenkins." Silas nodded slowly, slipping the note back into his pocket. "Well, Ilara Jenkins, you just cost me a fiancé, a very expensive suit, and my favorite restaurant." He stepped closer, the streetlights catching the lethal, calculating glint in his grey eyes. "But you bought me my life." And a gallows never forgets a debt. The rain began to fall in heavy, icy sheets as Silas shoved Ilara toward the mouth of the alley. The wail of police sirens from the Chicago Police Department was deafening now, echoing off the brick walls of the Gold Coast district. "Keep your head down and walk normally," Silas ordered, his voice an unnerving whisper against her ear. He slipped the hot Glock 19 into the waistband of his trousers, pulling his ruined suit jacket over it. "If you run, you become a target. Breathe, Ilara." Ilara tried to obey, but her legs felt like lead. They blended into a sudden crowd of panicked pedestrians fleeing the vicinity of Laura. 2 blocks down, parked inconspicuously near the shadows of Lower Wacker Drive, sat a matte black Audi RS6. Silas didn't fumble for keys. He pressed his thumb against a biometric scanner hidden under the driver's side door handle. The locks disengaged with a heavy thud. "Get in the back. Keep your head below the windows," he commanded. Ilara scrambled into the back seat, curling her knees to her chest against the cold, premium leather. Silas slid behind the wheel, the twin-turbo V8 roaring to life with a ferocious growl. He didn't turn on the headlights immediately. He merged seamlessly into the subterranean labyrinth of Lower Wacker, a concrete tunnel system that allowed them to bypass the gridlock of police cruisers flooding the streets above. For 10 minutes, the only sound inside the cabin was Ilara's ragged breathing and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers. She squeezed her eyes shut, the phantom sound of shattered crystal and suppressed gunfire ringing in her ears. "You're going into shock," Silas noted. He reached over, turning the climate control to maximum heat. "Drink the water in the door panel." Ilara fumbled in the dark, finding a heavy glass bottle of Voss water. She drank greedily, her hands shaking so badly she spilled it down her chin. "Where are we going?" she managed to croak. "Somewhere Victoria doesn't know exists," Silas replied, his eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror. 20 minutes later, they pulled into a dimly lit, private underground garage beneath a nondescript, brutalist high-rise in the South Loop. Silas led her to a private freight elevator. He entered a 6-digit code and scanned his retina. The doors closed, sealing them in a steel box that shot upward with stomach-dropping speed. The doors chimed open to reveal a massive, minimalist penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass overlooked the stormy expanse of Lake Michigan. There were no personal touches, no photos, no art, just sleek Italian leather furniture, a state-of-the-art security bank of monitors, and a massive granite kitchen island. It was a billion-dollar bunker. Silas walked straight to a mahogany wet bar, grabbed a crystal tumbler, and poured a generous measure of Macallan 18. He downed it in one swallow, then poured another. He didn't offer her one. Instead, he turned to face her, leaning against the bar. Under the harsh track lighting, he looked terrifying. His tailored charcoal suit was covered in white plaster and speckled with blood that wasn't his. "Talk," Silas said simply. The command hung heavy in the air. Ilara stood awkwardly in the foyer, shivering in her dust-covered uniform. I told you what happened. You told me my fiancé set a trap. You wrote it on a piece of Laura stationery in a room completely locked down by professional hitters," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into the cold, methodical tone that made him the most feared man in Chicago. How did a waitress know what my own security detail didn't? Ilara swallowed hard. "I grew up in Canaryville. My brother, Tommy, he ran with a local crew. He taught me how to read people. When I saw the men at the doors, I knew they weren't your usual detail. They weren't relaxed. They were braced. Silas narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. Observation is one thing. Knowledge is another. You knew it was Victoria. I saw her burn a phone, Ilara said, lifting her chin, refusing to shrink under his predatory gaze. She was hiding it under the table, texting frantically. And then a busboy, a man who definitely doesn't work at Laura, walked by and whispered to her. He said, 4 minutes. Stay clear of the crossfire. I put it together. Silas stared at her for a long, suffocating moment. He was a human lie detector, trained by a lifetime of betrayals to spot the slightest twitch of deception. He saw none in Ilara. He only saw terror, exhaustion, and a stubborn, raw instinct to survive. He set his glass down. What was your brother's last name? Jenkins. Tommy Jenkins. Silas walked over to the bank of security monitors and typed rapidly on a mechanical keyboard. A database flashed on the screen. Tommy Jenkins. Killed 4 years ago. In a botched heroin intercept on the west side. Worked as a driver for a mid-level enforcer named Carmine. Ilara's breath hitched. You know him? I know everyone who bleeds in my city. Silas said quietly. He turned back to her, the harshness in his eyes softening just a fraction. Your brother was set up. Carmine sold him out to the feds. And when the deal went sideways, Tommy took the bullets. Tears stung Ilara's eyes. It was a truth she had always suspected but could never prove. Hearing the billionaire mob boss confirm it with such clinical detachment felt like a punch to the gut. Before she could process it, the heavy steel door of the penthouse hissed, the electronic locks disengaging. Silas drew his Glock in a fraction of a second, aiming it squarely at the entrance. Ilara ducked behind the granite island. The door swung open, and a man stumbled in. He was built like a heavyweight boxer, wearing a torn, blood-soaked trench coat. He held his hands up immediately. It's me, boss, the man coughed. Leaning heavily against the doorframe, Silas lowered his weapon but didn't holster it. Dominic. You look like hell, Dominic Russo. Silas's most trusted lieutenant and childhood friend, grimaced, pressing a hand to a dark, spreading stain on his ribs. You should see the other guys. We got a massive problem, Silas. Laura was just the opening move. Silas grabbed a first aid kit from a hidden compartment in the kitchen and tossed it onto the island. Sit down. Talk while I patch you up. Ilara watched, horrified but fascinated, as Silas cut away Dominic's bloody shirt with surgical shears. He began cleaning a nasty grazing bullet wound along Dominic's ribcage with a bottle of antiseptic. Dominic hissed in pain but didn't flinch away. The Kensingtons didn't act alone, Dominic grunted, gripping the edge of the granite counter. Victoria isn't smart enough to orchestrate a hit like that without drawing my attention. She had backing. Who? Silas demanded, wrapping a pressure bandage tight around Dominic's torso. The O'Bannons. Silas paused, his hands freezing on the white gauze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The O'Bannon Syndicate was an Irish mob faction operating out of Boston. They had been trying to get a foothold in Chicago's shipping ports for a decade, and Silas had ruthlessly shut them out at every turn. Liam O'Bannon doesn't have the reach to buy off my inner circle, Silas said, his jaw clenching. Someone inside my house opened the door for them. Who bought the security detail at Laura? That's the worst part, Dominic said, looking up at Silas with grim, exhausted eyes. It wasn't a captain. It wasn't a street boss. The orders to pull your regular detail and swap them with the hitters came from the top. From Arthur Penhaligon. The Gallo family consigliere. The man who had raised Silas after his father was assassinated. The man who was supposed to be the undisputed voice of reason and loyalty. Silas stepped back, tossing the bloody shears into the stainless steel sink. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. The absolute, dead silence that radiated from him was infinitely more terrifying. Arthur, Silas murmured, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Ilara, still crouching near the edge of the island, felt a cold chill run down her spine. The name triggered a distant, buried memory. Arthur. Ilara whispered aloud, mostly to herself. Both men snapped their heads to look at her. She shrank back slightly, but forced herself to stand up. "Did you say Arthur Penhaligon? What do you know about Arthur, Ilara?" Silas asked, his voice a razor-thin wire of tension. "When my brother Tommy died," Ilara started, her hands gripping the hem of her apron. "I went to the police precinct to collect his personal effects. There was a burner phone in his pocket. It was smashed, but the SIM card still worked. The last voicemail he received before he died. It was a man with a thick British accent. He told Tommy to drive to the West Side warehouse. He said, 'The package is ready, boy. Don't be late.'" Dominic stared at her. "Arthur is from London. He's the only one in the upper echelon with that accent. Arthur got your brother killed to cover his own tracks during a bad shipment," Silas concluded, the puzzle pieces slamming into place, "and now he's trying to kill me to hand Chicago over to the O'Bannons. Victoria was just a pawn, a political marriage that Arthur arranged, knowing he could manipulate her family into helping him." Silas walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the violent storm raging over the dark waters of the lake. Lightning flashed, illuminating his sharp profile. He was at war. His consigliere was a traitor, his fiancée an assassin, and his empire was bleeding, and the only reason he wasn't lying in a morgue drawer right now was the exhausted, terrified waitress standing in his kitchen. He turned back to Ilara. She looked small in the massive penthouse, her black uniform stained and ruined, but she wasn't crying anymore. Her eyes, a sharp hazel, met his without wavering. She had lost her brother to this world, and instead of breaking, it had forged her into someone who could spot the devil in a crowded room. "You can't go back to your apartment," Silas said abruptly. "What? Why?" Ilara asked, panic finally creeping back into her voice. "I helped you. I told you what I know. Let me just go home. Arthur will scrub the security footage at Laura to find out how I escaped," Silas explained patiently, though there was no room for argument in his tone. "He'll see you drop that note. He'll see me take you out the back. By sunrise, he will send men to your apartment. If you go home, Ilara, you will be dead before breakfast. I have a cat," she blurted out, the sheer absurdity of the situation breaking her logic. "I have rent due on Tuesday." A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of Silas's mouth. "I will buy you a new cat. I will buy your entire apartment building. But you are staying here. Dominic and I have a war to wage, and you are the only civilian alive who can identify the busboy who passed the message to Victoria. I'm not a witness for your Mafia vendetta." Ilara snapped, suddenly furious. The adrenaline was morphing into anger. "I saved your life because I didn't want to watch a man get murdered while I was serving scallops. I don't want any part of this." Silas crossed the room, stopping mere inches from her. He was a full head taller, his physical presence overwhelming. Yet, he didn't touch her. He just looked down at her, his slate-grey eyes burning with a strange, possessive intensity. "You are already a part of it, Ilara," he said softly, the vibration of his voice sending a shiver through her. "You stepped into the crossfire the second you wrote that note. Arthur took your brother. He tried to take my life. We are going to take everything from him." He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against a smudge of plaster dust on her cheek. The touch was startlingly gentle for a man with blood on his hands. "I protect what is mine," Silas promised, a lethal vow whispered into the quiet room. "And right now, you are the most valuable thing I have." The storm outside battered the reinforced glass of the penthouse, mirroring the violent tempest within. Silas moved with lethal efficiency, orchestrating his counterstrike. Dominic, bandaged and fueled by painkillers, loaded magazines at the granite island with a rhythmic, metallic snick-snick. Ilara, wrapped in a cashmere throw on the sofa, broke the tense silence. "The busboy," she said, her voice steadying. "I know his face. He's a regular at Richard's bar on Milwaukee Avenue. My brother used to owe the bartender there. The guy has a distinct crescent moon burn on his jaw." Silas paused. A dangerous predatory smile touched his lips. "Richard's bar. A known O'Bannon front. He glanced at Dominic. Send a clean-up team. I want him alive. He knows where Arthur is. By 3 a.m., the burner phone on the glass coffee table buzzed. We got him, boss, a gravelly voice reported. Squealed fast. Arthur, Victoria, and Liam O'Bannon are at Hangar 4 at Midway International. They're loading a private Gulfstream to Boston. Lock down the airport's private perimeter, Silas ordered. He racked the slide of his Glock, slid it into his shoulder holster, and grabbed a tactical black jacket. Before leaving, Silas crouched in front of Ilara. The harsh lines of his face softened in the dim light. He pressed a sleek, black keycard into her palm. This operates the lockdown. If I don't come back by sunrise, there is a safe behind the abstract painting in the hall. The code is Tommy's birth year. Take the cash and the passports and disappear. Ilara stared at the keycard, her chest tightening. Silas. Arthur took my family. Don't let him take yours. His thumb gently traced her jawline, a startlingly intimate gesture for a man walking into a bloodbath. I will bring you his ghost, Ilara. The drive to Midway International was a blur of rain-slicked concrete. Silas drove the Audi RS6 like a guided missile, his mind entirely unclouded. For years, he had operated under the codes Arthur had instilled in him. Tonight, those codes would drown in blood. They breached Hangar 4 at precisely 4:15 a.m. The cavernous space smelled of jet fuel and damp asphalt. In the center, a sleek Gulfstream G650 sat with its stairs lowered. A dozen armed men in O'Bannon, colours loaded heavy duffel bags. Arthur Penhaligon, the silver-haired traitor, stood near the stairs alongside a smug Liam O'Bannon and a pale, trembling Victoria. Silas and Dominic struck from the shadows. Their suppressed weapons eliminated the first 4 guards before panic even registered. Then, chaos erupted. Unsuppressed gunfire shattered the hangar's quiet. Silas moved like a phantom, flanking the plane and dropping 2 more men with surgical precision. Dominic provided heavy covering fire, pinning Liam O'Bannon behind a baggage cart. Silas! Arthur's British accent cracked over the gunfire. He was scrambling up the airplane stairs, dragging Victoria by her arm as a human shield. It's over, boy. You don't have the numbers. Silas stepped from the shadows of a fuel truck. I don't need numbers, Arthur. I just need you. Liam O'Bannon blindly fired a shotgun from cover. But Dominic was faster, putting 2 rounds squarely into the Irish mobster's chest. Liam collapsed against the tarmac. Seeing his ally fall, Arthur shoved Victoria violently down the metal stairs to distract his surrogate son. Victoria screamed, tumbling to the concrete. Silas ignored his treacherous fiancée entirely. He ascended the stairs, his sights dead on the consigliere. This is for my father, Silas roared, firing a single round. The bullet shattered Arthur's right knee. The older man collapsed, clutching his bleeding leg. He looked up, his face twisted in agony. Silas, please. I practically raised you. You raised a sheep for your slaughter, Silas said, pressing the hot barrel of his Glock directly against Arthur's forehead. And you ordered the hit that killed Tommy Jenkins. Arthur's eyes widened in sudden, desperate confusion. Who the hell is Tommy Jenkins? The ghost that just ended your empire, Silas whispered. He pulled the trigger. By the time Silas returned to the South Loop penthouse, the sun was casting a weak, golden light over Lake Michigan. He had ordered his men to hand Victoria over to the feds with enough evidence to ensure her corrupt family would rot in prison. The syndicate war was over. He keyed open the door, fully expecting to find Ilara gone and the safe empty. Instead, he found her asleep on the leather sofa, curled tightly under the throw blanket. She had waited. Silas took off his holster and knelt beside her, brushing a dark lock of hair from her face. Ilara stirred, her hazel eyes fluttering open. She saw the exhaustion, the blood, and the dark finality in his grey eyes. Is it over? She whispered. Arthur is dead. Silas answered quietly. The O'Bannons are broken. Your brother is avenged. Profound relief washed over her features. She didn't pull away. Instead, she reached out, her small hand resting over his bruised knuckles. In the ruthless world of Chicago syndicates, Silas Gallo had always reigned alone. But looking at the brave waitress who had pulled him from the fire, he realized his empire had fundamentally changed. The waitress who slipped him a note had overthrown a dynasty. And in the ashes, a new, unbroken reign was about to begin. I hope this dramatic continuation successfully captures the intense, high-stakes romance and suspense you envisioned for Silas and Ilara, weaving in realistic elements like Richard's bar to ground the narrative. Their dynamic balances the gritty reality of a syndicate war with a compelling emotional payoff. Would you like me to generate a prequel scene exploring Tommy's final days? Or perhaps draft a character profile for Ilara?